was so impressive how much of the international collaboration can happen, but also what comes out of it. Have you seen this list of publications of the long-term fellows? These are people who are a couple of years up to PhD, and they come to this fascinating collaborative network. So I think thank you for this testimonial. Now, we will conclude this afternoon with two panels. And we are very privileged to have an extremely distinguished panelists and chairs of both panels. First panel will be about, I call it complexities of the international collaboration. I think we have heard from everyone so far how important it is to collaborate internationally. We also know that we are living in a complex world, and there are both challenges and opportunities. So this is what the first panel will be about. I would like to invite first Patricia Gruber. We are very privileged to have you here. She is Chief Science Advisor to the Secretary of State, Blinken, United States. Please join my stage. She will be chairing the panel. I would like to invite in the first panelist and also an introducer setting the scene, Dr. Signe Ratso. Signe is from the European Commission, Deputy Director General, Innovation, Prosperity, International Cooperation, and she's also trustee of HFSPO. I would like to invite then Honorable Paul Rennie. Paul is from the British Embassy here in Washington, D.C., and he is the Minister-Counsellor at the British Embassy here in Washington, D.C. We have a distinguished scientific attaché of the Embassy of Italy, United States, Professor Marco Gilli. Please join us here. Last but not least, every panel will have HFSP hands-on experience. So we have here HFSP Awardee 2021 of the Cross-Disciplinary Fellowship, Rahul Chaiwa, who will join us as well. Rahul, please join us here. So I will turn over to Patricia to take over the panel and to steer the proceedings for the next half an hour. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I want to thank HFSP and particularly Professor Kravat for extending this kind invitation to moderate this panel. Echoing what you've already heard, it's true that science and technology is an important driver for human well-being, economic prosperity, and stability, while also linking national research ecosystems across the globe. International cooperation and coordination across government, industry, and academia is key to responsible science, technology, and innovation to address global challenges and that impact all of us. The U.S. Department of State engages to promote international science, technology, and innovation ecosystems through public-private partnerships, educational exchanges, workshops, bilateral relationships, and multilateral engagements through organizations such as the G7, the G20, the Organization for Economic Development, Cooperation and Development, and the UN Committee on Science and Technology for Development, just to name a few. I don't need to tell this audience that underpinning all of these efforts and are addressing all of these challenges is underpinned by really good fundamental research. The U.S. supports openness and transparency in research while maintaining competitiveness. Our diplomatic goals to use technology for good, strengthen relationships, and promote U.S. norms and values and best practices in foreign science and technology communities have remained the same over many years. What has changed is the environment in which we practice science policy and science diplomacy. Since this is an event to share and celebrate the wonderful advancements that the HFSP has promoted, I'm a little reluctant to say this, but the S&T ecosystem isn't immune to the challenges that we face globally, such as armed conflicts, migration driven by politics or climate, great power competition, loss of trust in governments and in science, misinformation, disinformation, infringement on human rights, and so on. And while science and technology has made great contributions in areas such as human health, food security, and clean energy, these advances haven't always benefited society uniformly. Gaps in economic prosperity and stability have continued to widen. Within this dynamic foreign policy environment, foreign policy has to balance between using technology to solve societal problems, reducing the risk of nefarious uses, and maintaining a competitive posture. We're very fortunate today to be joined by our panelists who grapple with these issues on an ongoing basis. And I say all this because I don't want you to think that our panelists have easy jobs. They have a lot to think about. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but before I do that, first let me turn it over to Signe Ratso, who is the Deputy Director General for Research and Innovation at the European Commission.
Many thanks, Patricia, for your kind introduction and your introductory words to this session. Dear panelists, representatives of HFSPO, grantees, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it's my great pleasure to address you here in this historic building, also in this auditorium, which is named after a wise man, Fred Kavli, who dedicated his life and resources to science. And let me say what how I take the title, how I interpret the title of this session, namely Lights and Shadows of the Multilateral Scientific Collaboration. As mentioned, I represent the European Commission. European Commission is in charge of the, I believe, the largest international multilateral research and innovation program, which is called Horizon Europe for the current period of 7 years, which started in 21 until 27. It has the budget of nearly 100 billion euros for 7 years from the EU budget, plus also the contributions of those countries who are associated to our program, which adds additional 30%. During the previous period, 100 and the researchers, innovators from 177 countries of the world participated in our program. So it's leaves aside only a handful of countries who didn't, which speaks of itself that it's really open multilateral program. It is highly international. It is highly collaborative. What is the value of international collaboration? Well, needless to say, it enables us to tackle together the global societal challenges. It also enables to have access to the world's best talents, expertise and resources, enhancing also supply and demand of innovative solutions. In 2021, with the global approach to research innovation, which is Europe's strategy for international cooperation in a changing world, the European Union committed to remain as open as possible and as closed as necessary, taking into account also the changing world that also Patricia mentioned in her introduction. Through our program, we actually have offered also the possibility of association to our program, first to the neighboring countries, but now also to the global players with whom we share strong research and innovation capacity, but also the common values. Out of these global partners, New Zealand was the first to join Horizon Europe last year. Now we will sign agreement with Canada at the beginning of July. We concluded negotiations with South Korea, Japan, Singapore are among the countries who are considering of association. Needless to say that already throughout several programs, we do have our European partners, Norway, Iceland, all the neighboring countries. Now the total number of associated countries is 19. Now this leads me to the HFSPO, which is where multilateral collaboration is part of its intrinsic nature. And the European Commission is a member of HFSPO since the beginning for 35 years. And as said, HFSP promotes international collaboration in the spirit of science without border frontiers. And the EU, the European Commission, clearly shares these objectives as being also the funding member. Now, I myself have been HFSPO trustee for the few years, and certainly have been also working to further strengthen the core mission of HFSP. The forte of this organization is to identify, support the best international frontier research via grant and fellowship projects. But as said, we are living in a rapidly changing geopolitical environment. All of you know how science diplomacy is used as a mechanism of engagement, often when other channels are under strain. So the European Commission's current work on a European framework for science diplomacy focuses on how science can help and strengthen diplomacy. This involves, for instance, encouraging and training our diplomats to engage with and actively involve the scientific community. Here, the scientific community and policymakers share a common responsibility to make sure that science effectively underpins and strengthens diplomacy, from climate models, health crisis, to increasing societal acceptance of new technologies. But let's not be naive. Science diplomacy must be complemented by putting the right measures in place to safeguard research security. You can all think of shadows where scientific findings are directed by countries for malign purposes or disinformation. So I acknowledge that we as trustees of HFSPO have dedicated a significant amount of time in discussing the core scientific values and guiding norms. This is not nice to have, it's absolutely fundamental. This brings me, of course, to mention Ukraine and to the shadows of the difficult situation there due to the continuing war. Science, of course, cannot stop the war, but it can and should contribute to its end. This is why the European Commission is helping Ukraine by associating it to our program, but also when Russia's aggression against Ukraine started in 2022, we discussed with Pavel Kabat, what else can we do? This is when we launched the Scientists for Science initiative, providing ad hoc funds to Ukrainian researchers who joined HFSP grants. And so we continued in 23 and 24, and of course we are ready to continue. Now, last but not least, as we are here in Washington, DC, let me also mention and highlight the cooperation that we do have with the USA. The US is an ally for the EU research and innovation. There are nearly 3,000 US researchers and innovators who are participating in ongoing EU-funded research projects. On health research, US organizations are, after Switzerland, by far the most represented third country in the health cluster of Horizon Europe. And for the health cluster, what is the specific situation is that the US researchers get directly funded also from our program because of the gentleman's agreement that we do have with the US, who also fund from NIH funds the European researchers. And we very much hope that with the recent NIH grants policy statements of last October, which provides guidance on access to data, documentation that supports research outcomes, our cooperation will remain high on the EU side. The last joint consultative group meeting that we had in Washington, D.C. back in March, we also confirmed together the positive momentum in the EU-US R&I relations and the willingness of both sides to reinforce it further. So this brings me to the end of this intervention, namely as HFSPO is one of these initiatives in which we work together, and most importantly, which brings light to our future cooperation. Let there be more light and fewer shadows in international collaboration.
Thank you, Signe. So I'm going to move along and ask Paul if you wouldn't mind. I'm going to kind of combine the introductions and the questions, if that's okay, in the interest of time. So Paul, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and give us your view of the role of science communication in articulating the stakes of high-risk research to policymakers.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Paul Rennie. I'm with the British Embassy here. I run our trade and global issues work. So effectively, that is all of our thematic relations between the UK and the US is my responsibility here. It's interesting, this question for me about communications. I am a professional economist by background. And when I was recruited 20 plus years ago by the Foreign Office, it was because they wanted more economics expertise in the Foreign Office. But critically, they wanted expertise that could talk to policymakers. So the key part of my role was kind of the link between these different elements. It was how am I able to talk to economists and understand what the economists are saying, but critically, how do I take those ideas back to our political leadership, our key funding agencies and so on, and explain why the economics matters for British government policy. And I think short of that, you have a real problem, because all the expertise in the world that doesn't explain itself well will not have a good impact on policymaking. And I think for me, the COVID pandemic in the UK was a very particular example of where someone like Sir Patrick Vallance rose to prominence because he gave very clear, very understandable briefings to the British public. Now, I think as all of us know, it takes an inordinate amount of capability and expertise to talk about it in a way that the average person can understand. And I think that is, for me, always the risk in any level of expertise, science, economics, any kind of expertise, whereby you spend too much time talking to each other, you develop language and code words that only really interest each other, you talk about issues that affect each other, and in the process struggle to explain to the average person in the street what this is all about. And not least as a government employee, I'm always very alert to the fact that it is the average person in the street who is paying my salary and ultimately funding our science. And if it doesn't make sense to them, why should it make sense to them paying their taxes to make it work? So for me, that is the key value of why science and science communication is a fundamental part to making sure we still have the funding to get things done.
That's great insight, and you're right, sometimes we do talk to each other too much, and I will say, we in government are really guilty of using acronyms too much. But
Well, it's funny, my very first day of my economics master's program, first day of the economics program full stop, the lecturer stood up and said to us, for the next 4 years, I'm going to teach you a lot of jargon. The purpose of the jargon is not to make the science of economics any easier, it's just to keep the non-economists out. And I think that's true in an awful lot of sciences, and particularly law.
Wow, okay, thank you. Marco, would you mind introducing yourself briefly and then tell us from your perspective, how have the geopolitical factors that have been mentioned changed multilateral scientific collaboration?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for this kind invitation. I am a science counselor at the Embassy of Italy, and the best greetings just on the behalf of the Embassy and also on the behalf of the Ambassador of Italy, who unfortunately cannot be here. Well, it's a pleasure being here because, Italy has been actively involved in HFSP since many years. And as already mentioned, the original idea of HFSP was conceived in Italy at the Venice meeting at the Economic Summit in 1987. Well, Italy is very much involved. There are many Italian institutions that has been recipient of research grant and many awardees. So, very happy to be here. And just recently, just last week, we had the G7 meeting in Italy with the head of state of the G7 countries, but also it was extended, to many other countries. And what is important is that a crucial part, I would say, a central part of the final statement was exactly devoted to science and technology, and also to multilateral collaboration. I just would like to cite, they say, we support the development of frontier science, emerging technologies, and research infrastructure. And another part of the declaration was, we also emphasize the importance of promoting international talent mobility and circulation in emerging technologies among the G7 countries and partners, as well as cooperation with low and middle income countries, and they reiterate the commitment to open science and research security and integrity. So that was an important statement because in this G7, science and technology have played, I would say, a significant role. Why? Well, because we already mentioned that our societies are more and more interconnected, problems are more and more complex and difficult to face, and also we are witnessing a kind of unprecedented technology transition. It's not only artificial intelligence, data, and computational possibility, but a lot of new technologies are emerging that are going to transform our life, but also the way of doing scientific research, because, scientific research is becoming more and more interdisciplinary, and especially we need critical mass of researchers, because you are researchers, and critical mass of research infrastructure. So that's why, and that's the life, in some way, of multilateral cooperation. That's why we need now more than before multilateral cooperation in order to share resources and especially to share data, which is even more important. There is a program of the OECD, Data Free Flow and Trust, which is significant, but also to have an impact, to have a kind of global impact, because multilateral cooperation allows researchers, allows society to have an impact, and the impact is important in order to develop common policies, because this is another point, another critical point. To be able, in new technology, in emerging technology, think about artificial intelligence, where we have different regulation in Europe, in the United States, and so on. So the importance of giving in some way a kind of contribution to develop common policies. And then, of course, it's important to have student exchanges and talent circulation. So that's in a very, very synthetic way, my point of view on the life of multilateral cooperation.
Thank you very much, Marco. I think it's important to we all realize that the sort of researcher to researcher way is the way that science and technology advances, but we need that high level multilateral government support to kind of really address the big problems. So thank you for those comments. Rahul, I'd like to turn it over to you. Please introduce yourself and tell us what challenges have you faced as a researcher in pursuing international collaboration, and what advice would you give to an early career person?
Thank you, Patricia. I come from, is this on? Okay, hi. So I'm Rahul Chaiwa. I come from Pune, India, where I grew amidst Western Ghats and monsoon, which is where my love for nature and science grew. In school, I realized I deeply enjoy solving math and physics problems. So I pursued a BS and MS in physics from Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research in Mohali, fully funded by the government of India. After that, I went to do my PhD in physics at the International Center for Theoretical Sciences, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Bengaluru, India, again. Where I was advised by 3 awesome professors. So I got to learn different things, both in experiments and theoretical physics. After my PhD, I wanted to work on problems that are impactful for human society. And luckily, I got to work with, I got introduced to Manu Prakash at Stanford University, and thanks to HFSP for supporting me. So now I go in the ocean and I look at the physics, in particular soft matter physics of oceanic ecosystem, which is at the heart of the ongoing climate change. And that said, I think oceans and climate change is an international problem, and thus international scientific collaboration is almost essential to make any fundamental advancement in our understanding of that system. The problem that I think one of the biggest challenges of that I faced as an academic in the US was related to, as Tara already mentioned, visa renewal processes. And that said, I think a lot of people sitting here must have experienced that it's really difficult when your visa stamp has expired to go out of the country and re-enter. And so the decision to go back and see your family, for example, becomes somewhat challenging, where you start seeing the cost-benefit ratio of the situation. That said, I think it would be like, I strongly feel that making that process slightly easier for international scholar will definitely promote international collaboration, because I know people who have not seen their families for years, and that's not unheard of for postdoctorals especially. And it would be, yeah, I strongly feel that it would really improve the situation of postdoc. And to go forward, the suggestions I would give to future or young researcher would be to work on challenging problems that are important for the human society, and to not follow conventional disciplinary boundaries. Because most of the cool science actually lie in the interdisciplinary science. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you for persevering, by the way. So I'm going to go back to Signe. You touched on this a little bit, but could you talk about how within the Horizon Europe program you balance openness of research with safeguarding the interests of your member countries?
Well, as you mentioned also in your introduction, we are living in a changing world. There was a reference to the G7 summit, which actually highlighted the role of research and innovation, namely in the strategic sectors, technologies which will change our future. Well, let's just mention AI, which will be everywhere. We don't know yet how it can and will change our future. It has a huge potential, but there are also risks associated to that. That's why it's no wonder that one of the topics that the G7 research ministers who will meet at the beginning of July, also during the Italian G7 presidency, will discuss the topic of research security. And this is now the topic to which also in the Commission, in the EU, we paid more attention, particularly in our program Horizon Europe, but now also together with the member states who issued the recommendation on research security, which actually couples the economic freedom, autonomy of universities, research institutions, with the responsibility. Responsibility first to assess the risks, potential risks, and then also take the necessary mitigating measures. And this is something that we do also in our program, Horizon Europe. So it continues to be open internationally, but we also need to have safeguards in place, particularly in the sectors where the risks are higher. There was a reference to biotechnology as one of the sectors where there are the risks which were not there before, well, also due to the nature of being related in synergetic way also with other sectors. There are also the potential usages where we need to be careful. I mentioned AI, but there are also other sectors which have been highlighted in the European economic security approach. So really we do combine the openness with some measures if necessary.
Thank you. That's great, and I think a very thoughtful approach to the issue. So thank you for that. We could go on, but we're out of time according to the clock. So would you please join me in thanking our panelists for their insights?